The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everybody. We would like to thank you for joining us today for our Integrating Chemical Risk Assessment into an Approvals Workflow, how Chemwatch can help. Let's go ahead and get started. So your speakers today is Tom Hassey, Business Development Manager out of our Michigan office. Myself, I'm Paul Benbow, Business Development Manager out of North Carolina. And Augusta, or Gusty, Brenly, and she's our Solutions Engineer, and she's out of our Tennessee location, and she'll be doing the demo today and the heavy lifting. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. In your GoToWebinar panel, you have this little arrow here, and you can click that and minimize the screen if you're not familiar with GoToWebinar. Or if you'd like to ask a question, there's a little box here you can ask a question for the staff. We'll be collecting the questions at the very end. We'll be presenting those to everybody at the QA. So we're going to run about an hour, try to finish up a couple minutes early, and we may run over optional, but at the top of the hour, the hour is over, and optionally you can stay and listen to some more questions if required. And the only other housekeeping thing I like to talk about is we will be sending out the recording to this video and our slide deck. So if you see something that's noteworthy, just keep in mind that we will be sending that out to everybody. And then a quick thing before we get started, if anybody's going by the AIHA conference, AIHCE in Philadelphia next week, come by our booth, say hello. And you come through the front door, the image I have is not great, but you come in the main entrance, look to the right, and our booth is right there. So we have a very prominent booth at the AIHA show. So hope you can come by. Always love to meet everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to have a very quick webinar today. I'm going to spend just a few minutes reviewing kind of an overview of what the concept is, about 6 slides, and we're going to roll right into the demonstration. And then we'll show you kind of how the two work hand in hand. We'll follow up with detail on the approvals and in detail on the risk assessment. And at the very end, we'll just kind of talk a little bit about how Chemwatch can help. So I guess the big question is, before you approve a chemical, you need to understand how it's going to be used. So to understand how it's going to be used, a risk assessment is a great solution for that. But then you may have employees in your organization that would do 2 different risk assessments. One may use this method, one may use that method. Well, how do you make sure that all your risk assessments are homogeneous? How do you make sure that everybody's doing it the same way? That's where our risk assessment module that goes hand in hand with our approvals module really helps out, because it forces everybody to use the same tool, yielding similar results, so that you know and you can make better decisions. So in an approvals process, we have perhaps a different flow depending on what's required. So in that flow, it may require a regulatory review, an SDS review, an environmental review, or an internal procedural review. So when we place a chemical in the workplace, we really need to have a good handle on what the implications are. And many times there are multiple stakeholders depending on the type of chemical and the application. And so we're hoping at the presentation that you'll see how easily we handle all these scenarios. So basically it's building blocks. As you're mapping out kind of how you want the approval flow to go, it's very much like the image in the background. It's making decisions, trying to understand who the transition is, who needs to sign off on it. If it's a benign chemical, that may be a different workflow than a toxic chemical. What forms need to be added in the event that it goes in this path versus that path. So workflows are kind of the key, and I won't get into workflows very much. I'll let Gusty do that. But essentially, there's a request, there's an action, you submit it, and then there's review. And then within that review, you can just review the SDS, and you don't have to do a risk assessment, but in our system, it's very easy to do that. So we include that ability. And then you may review the standard operating procedure, and then you either approve or reject the chemical. All that information is kept in the system. You can go back, 5 years from now. Why did we do this? Who approved it? what was the application? Did we approve this just to use one time for this one thing, and that's not an approval, from here forward because this chemical may be very toxic? All that information can be kept in the system. But fundamentally, each stage has an owner. The system will basically let each owner contribute what they need. So because we're a software as a service-based module, people basically log into the system, or they can use their email. So we don't require to use one or the other. So it's very friendly for large organizations and people that are very occasional users that may just have to approve something, but they don't sit in the system all day. We're really good at that. So we have an approvals constructor, and then basically, once again, Gusty will be covering this information in detail. But fundamentally, we can have multiple stages. So the requester, in stage 1, may request a chemical, fill out the form, and perform the risk assessment, or hand that off to user number 2. User number 2 may get that information, look at the information from the management perspective, then forward it for an environmental review. And then in turn, that may get forwarded to the health and safety review. So all these things are possible, and our system is very flexible. So I think one thing before I turn the demonstration over to Gusty is that Chemwatch is tightly integrated. We had one team of programmers develop everything, so we didn't buy some software from this company that we acquired and try to, stitch it into what we have. Everything is integrated. You'll not see a reason to copy paste information between modules. You'll see Gusty when she's using the system, the information that's here will be able to be put there. So as we're working through the system, we never make you dig for information in a different module and then copy paste the information, and it's basically, it adds ease of use and productivity to the users of our system, and our users have been benefiting from this for years. So, okay, with that being said, I'm going to hand everything over to Gusty.
Thanks, Paul. So today I will be showing you an example workflow of our approvals module. And this example workflow is going to have 4 separate stages, as Paul alluded to. Now, there are going to be individuals who are assigned to each of these stages. And in this example, it is just one user. However, with our system, you can actually have multiple stakeholders assigned to each stage. Additionally, you can also have location-based stakeholders. Now, this is a very simple example. You'll see that it's a linear workflow, and each stage will transition into the next stage. However, as Paul mentioned during his slides, we can also integrate complex workflows that have parent and child stages and multiple paths within your systems approvals module. So here today, I will again just be showing you this basic workflow. In order to illustrate this, I will log in as each user, and then each user will see the information that is relevant to their job function and their role within the system. So you'll see here I will log in as Amy, and as Amy I will log into my system, and again she will have a unique view of the Chemwatch system, and her permissions and editing rights will allow her to do particular functions within the system. Now for this example, Amy has read-write access to the folders, so she will be able to see everything within the system folders that your company or corporation places within those folders. Additionally, she will also have a full search option to our full SDS library of vendor SDSs. In this example, I will launch an approval workflow from the system folders. You'll see that it will request information from me, such as my email address and name. However, you can have that pre-programmed for each individual users within the master system settings, so that essentially it will bypass this stage. In this example, you will see that I will launch directly into the action steps that are required of Amy, which is our requester in this example. You'll see that Amy is required to fill out a system form, and this form is actually customized by your organization. So this form will be able to capture whatever information is important to you for reporting purposes or tracking purposes or just informational purposes of that chemical. So you'll see here that I, as Amy, will be able to fill out this form and include that information that, again, is pertinent to your organization. Again, you are in control of what type of information you are going to capture in this form. Additionally, it's important to note that you can make some of these fields required as needed. So some of this information might just be useful, while other information is required for some type of reporting purpose downstream. You'll see as the second action step within Amy as the requester stage is the ability to choose the folder within the system where this chemical will finally be placed or where it is going to reside. It's important to note within our system, this folder structure or this hierarchy of folders is completely customizable by the administrator of your system. So this would be essentially defined either based by location or product line or whatever else you would like to define that as. After this is built out, the user can place that chemical either in that location or in that folder, and it will go there once that material is approved. Additionally, they can also add volume or weight information. So you'll see here that I am going to say that I'm going to bring 50 liters of this particular substance on a site, and I'm also going to place it in area 2, or I could place it in multiple locations as well. Once I have entered that information, you'll see that I can save it, and then I can submit it on to the next stage. So in this case, I'll say, please review this item for on-site procurement. And this message or notification will be passed to the next stakeholder in the next stage. You'll see as Amy, she can review those items that she's requested. She can see all items that have been approved in the system. She can see those that have been rejected, canceled, or she can review her own requests. Within these columns, you'll see that she has filters that she can use, so she can filter by specific information, whether that be stage name, action name, approval name, folder name, or materials name, and she can also filter by status, so she can see all of those in progress, and additionally, she can see a complete history. Now, the administrator has the ability to customize which users see which tabs. In this case, I have made all of these visible for Amy. Now, for the next stage, we are going to log in as the manager. Now, the manager has received a notification by email letting him know that he has a new pending item within his queue. All of those individuals who are involved with this particular workflow will receive notifications as long as those email notifications are set up within the master system settings. The manager could easily just click on that auto login link and it would redirect him to his approvals module, or he can log in to his system, so his user view, in this case Bill, who's the manager, and then he can go to his approvals queue and see all of those items that are pending. Additionally, he'll be able to see those tabs that I just described in the last view. So you'll see here that we have a pending item, and again, this is that item that Amy, their requester, had requested. In this particular example, we have Bill, the manager, reviewing this form. So again, he's going to review all of that information that Amy just submitted. Additionally, you will notice that this is in read-only mode, so you do have the option to have that form as editable or read-only. In the next action step of the stage, I have him reviewing the location information. So again, where Amy would like to store that. Additionally, I have him reviewing the area information. So again, reviewing material information, the volumes or weights that's assigned to that. If it is assigned to multiple locations, you'll see that it will display that per location. Additionally, if there are any incompatibilities that exist, you'll see that this manager can review our incompatibility report and decide whether he would like to accept this placement of this chemical in that area, or if he would like to reject that. Additionally, this webinar is about incorporating risk assessment into the approvals process. So you'll see here that we actually have the ability to include risk assessments, either a single risk assessment or multiple risk assessments within our approvals module. So you'll see here, if you are putting it in multiple locations, it will allow you to perform a risk assessment per chemical per location. And in order to perform that risk assessment, you would simply just need to unlock that chemical. You would need to assign a task. You will see that these tasks are already predefined in our system, and you would just select that task that is applicable to that chemical in that area, so how it is being used. Additionally, you will notice that there is a hazard rating that has already been applied to the substance. Our hazard ratings are derived either based on our vendor data or based on our gold data. So we have several services available to our customers. One of those is vendor data extraction. Essentially, we will extract 67 data points off of your vendor SDS, and one of those data points is our H codes. And so those H codes can be used as a basis of this risk assessment. Additionally, we also have documents and data that has been independently researched and written by Chemwatch, and we refer to that as our gold data. And you can also, as a customer, choose to use that gold data for that H code information as a basis for your risk assessment. Now, whenever I say that it's used as a basis for your risk assessment, it is using those H codes in the calculation of the risk band for this substance in combination with some other criteria. Now, some other criteria that is included in that is the operating temperature. So this is when the user would define the operating temperature of this particular substance. They would also define the volatility or dustiness. You'll see in some instances the volatility will be preset if it is at a certain operating temperature. However, you do have the option to unlock that if you would like to make adjustments. These are just the settings within the system, and it will lock it at after a certain point because it will have a set volatility. Additionally, you will also need to define the scale of use, and you'll notice that as I adjust these, that it could have an impact on the risk band. So again, this is a rather dangerous chemical at a 4+. However, if we reduce how this is used, you will see that it will have an effect on the risk band over here on the right-hand side. So initially, this was a 4+. However, considering how we are using this and the environment and manner in which it's used, you'll see that our risk band has been reduced. Additionally, you can also have users apply controls, and those controls would be either containment or you would want to apply PPE. Additionally, you can also add phrasing to your final document as well. And those controls will actually have an impact on the risk band itself. Now, after you have completed your risk band, you will need to say that your risk assessment is complete. And so in this case, I will say yes. And then it will also ask me if I would like to copy this over to the relevant modes. I will say yes. Now, what it means by modes is we actually have two different types of risk assessments here. And you'll see that I can actually toggle back and forth from the two. And the ILO mode is essentially just risk assessment for those that have health hazards. So this is a health risk assessment. And then we have the UN mode, which is used specifically for transport and storage. Now, you can again have the system copy some of this information from mode to mode, and you can perform risk assessments either on the health nature of that material or based on the transport and storage. Now, after you have completed a risk assessment, you will see it will give you a status, and you'll see that your risk assessment is complete. In the case of this risk assessment, it has not been performed yet, so you'll see the status of that is different. Again, you can have multiple risk assessments per location, and those could be used for different purposes or different tasks. Additionally, these can also be assigned to jobs. Now, if I view this report here, it is going to show me the report for our health risk or our dangerous goods risk assessment because I'm in the UN mode. And you'll see that again, it's just providing a full report on that material based on transport and storage. And again, it is going to outline the information that has been calculated during our risk assessment and the use of that risk assessment tool. As I mentioned, you can also add these to jobs. So for instance, you might use multiple chemicals in a single job, and this will give you the opportunity to go ahead and add that to an existing job that you have in the system. So you'll see here, if I would like to add it to a job or a process, it will show me all of those that are already saved within the system. So these are all the processes that I have, or I could create a new process. So in this case, I will go ahead and add this to process C, and then I could also add, you know, additional information about this material, such as who it was assessed by, who it was approved by, how many people are exposed, and then I could say refer to SOP, and then I can also say the date that it was added. It will default to today's date, and then I can also indicate when it needs to be reviewed again. After this information has been saved, you'll notice that this information will be displayed at the bottom of your report. Additionally, within the home module, once it's approved, you will be able to view that jobs information and be able to view that jobs report. So all of that can be done as an action step within this particular stage of the workflow. And again, it will require those users to go ahead and set this information and complete those risk assessments before it will allow you to submit it on to the next stage. You will notice that there are multiple buttons here. In the prior stage, I had just the submit button. So essentially, it was just allowing me to submit it for that manager review. However, as the manager, I do have a few different options, as I have the ability to reject it or return it as well. So I can submit it either forward to the next person who is in charge of the next stage, or I can reject it. So if I reject it, it will end the process completely and this request will be canceled. However, the information will still be archived in the system permanently. Additionally, I can also return it. So for instance, maybe Amy submitted something in the form that caused concern and I would like to clarify that. You'll see I can return that to Amy and add comments, and then Amy can resubmit this for review. In this case, I'm going to submit it on to the next stage. So I will say, I reviewed this material and it looks good. And again, that notification will be sent to the next person who is the stakeholder of the next stage. So you'll see here now it has been sent on its way. Now we have other types of reviews that can be done in the system. So that was the manager review that includes that risk assessment. We have now passed this on to the environmental review, which is Cindy in this case. Again, she will get a notification that a new item is pending in her queue. She will receive that notification by email, or she can again just log into her system as I have now. Again, I have her reviewing that same form that Amy submitted. However, you could incorporate different forms in different stages, and those forms can be reviewed by different individuals. It's really up to your organization whether you would like them to review the same form or if you would like them to review individual stage forms as well. In this case, I only have 2 action steps. The action step was to review that form. Additionally, I have this environmental personnel reviewing the environmental report. So you'll see this is our gold report on this particular substance, which is benzene, and you'll see that it's going to give additional information about toxicity and environmental fate. So in this case, Cindy can use this information to make key decisions about whether she would like to approve, reject, or return this material. Additionally, she can also note any concerns. So in this case, she might want to go ahead and submit this on to the next stage for approval, but she might want to note that this is or is not a marine pollutant or any other information that might be pertinent to this particular material's approval. In this case, again, she has reviewed those action steps and it will be passed on to the next stage, which is the EHS review. And again, I have another user that is assigned to this particular stage, and he is going to get a notification that a new material is pending within his queue, and he will be able to review that. In this case, we again have him reviewing that same form, or you could have him reviewing another form that maybe Cindy was required to fill out. It's up to you and how you would like to do that as an organization. I also have him reviewing other types of reports that we have in the system. So again, we have reports based on either gold data or vendor data, and these can be reviewed as a part of the action steps within this process. So you'll see I have them reviewing the mini SDS, and this is just a one-page summary of the information that's found on a gold SDS. You'll see that it's going to include ingredient information, GHS information, health hazard information, precautions for use, property information, emergency information, first aid information, and also safe storage information. In this case, this is someone who is involved with EHS, so he might be interested in reviewing the glove types or the respirator that is required according to the ANSI standard for this particular chemical. So in this case, he might want to reject it because maybe they don't have that respirator in that area, or he might return it to the previous user based on something he reviewed in the form, or he could approve it. So in this case, you might say, yes, I will approve this, but please make sure that we have this respirator in the area. And in this case, you'll see that he can notify all users upstream involved in the process so that they get this notification, and that, again, they will get it by email, or they can view that within their system internally. It is important to note that this item has been approved, so we would be able to locate it here within our Approved tab. Additionally, it's important to note that he is an administrator of the system, so he has an additional view that we have not seen in the previous user views, and it is this admin tab. So you can have certain users, either those that are the final approvers or even reviewers within the stages, that have access to this tab, and you'll see that they'll be able to search information about chemicals that have been reviewed or approved or rejected on your site. And again, all of these particular columns are dynamically sortable. Additionally, you can filter for specific information. So for instance, if you want to see all of those that are approved, you could see all of the items that have ever been approved within your organization. Additionally, you can view a complete history of that. And as an administrator, you might want to export that information into Excel or export that into a PDF report for review. You can also do that from this queue as well. So that is an example of a linear workflow that you can achieve very easily within our system. However, just keep in mind there are a lot of different configurations that we can achieve. Some of those are very simple and some of those are complex. The basic elements are you have stages, you have transition steps between those stages, and then you have stakeholders that are assigned to those stages. You are in charge of choosing the types of actions that you would like those individuals to perform in each stage, and you also can make decisions as an organization as to what types of transitions you would like to incorporate or include within your workflow. Additionally, Tom is going to mention other aspects that can be incorporated into the workflow, such as conditional rules and also tagging rules that are based on queries. So with that being said, I will go ahead and pass this over to Tom so that he can conclude the webinar with the PowerPoint portion of the presentation.
Thanks, Gusty. Thank you, Paul. So you saw the system in action, basically, and I wanted to go over just basically what I call framework or the mechanics as to how this all comes together. In the start, I want to talk about what I call we'll call it the hub of the wheel, and that is the data for an approvals process. And quite frankly, it comes from the SDS. So you can see what the system's pulling in, or what you can pull into this process is certainly the ingredients data from an SDS, properties, hazards, but also data from other databases. As an example, with the regulatory database, we actually do that for you. When we extract SDS data, we do so by the ingredient or CAS number, and we link it into our regulatory database that has about 6,200 lists currently and over 1.5 million substances. But there's other databases you can link to, and you can do this actually through the forms system. So the first step, as Gusty was talking about, and the key is the stakeholder, the owner of each stage. And this can be any type. It can be a person, it can be just a specific role, or a group. And you can tie individual users to different stages or different groups and roles. So the system is very flexible in that regard. And what it does is sends out an email to the approval whenever there's a requested item. So it's real simple to set up, but this is certainly the key step to get started. The next is the tracking. In other words, you need to assign a request to an owner, and you do this very simply in our system by obviously the person's name or a group name, but then the email. And then this request is then tracked and sent. The requests and different aspects of the process are sent to this owner in terms of that stage. Alerts. Actually, what these are notifications. So, for instance, there are instances or activities within a approvals process that fall outside the norm, we'll call it. It could be delays, it could be a regulatory concern, an internal HSC concern, or there may be a risk to a vendor or some other business risk. So what you can do is you can set up notifications. So whenever this condition occurs in whatever stage, it's flagged. It's flagged so the next owner can then decide whether to accept or reject accordingly. Actions. There's many things you can assign as a stakeholder action. It could be, you could point to a folder, maybe assigning a quantity for a chemical. It could be filling out a form. You can attach something. As Gusty mentioned, specifically, you can do a risk assessment, can be one of the actions. You may want to add an incompatibility report. Other reports you can add, we call them Chemwatch Gold reports, and these are specific documents, what we call based on the review of the SDS by our chemists and toxicologists. So they look at it from a worker safety point of view and create these one-page documents. Gusty touched on one briefly, so instead of saying something like HEPA equivalent for a respirator or impervious rubber gloves, these documents specifically tell you, for instance, for gloves, what materials you should use in ranking order, but more importantly, we have a category that says these are materials you should not use. Again, you can attach these as part of the workflow and use them as criterion for the next stage acceptance or a rejection. So the reporting, this is sort of an input-output in terms of an approval process. So in other words, the information you're capturing in the approval process itself is actually an input into your reports, your required reports. So data you capture within the process, forms, the SDS data, some regulatory data, other criterion specific to your organization as an example. You can use this data as building blocks to create specific environmental reports or standard operating procedures, PPE summaries, other types of data. And then these reports you can use, attach, so to speak, to different stages of the approval process, which then again requires specific stage owners to review, sign off, and approve the data from these reports. Forms. This really is, we'll call it, if you think of it this way, what the forms operate as within an approval process is much like a bill of material would operate within a manufacturing process. It's the pull mechanism that advances the criterion to the next stage for acceptance or rejection. With our system, you can create all sorts of types of forms, picks, drop-downs, uploads, multi-line text fields. You can also make these required or not, forcing certain behavior in the process. And these forms, multiple forms, can be assigned to one or many stakeholders at any stage in the approval process, entirely up to you. And then the data that you're capturing from these forms, you can use again to generate specific reports or documents. But more importantly, it's the pull mechanism, as I mentioned earlier, directs the workflow. It also can serve as trigger alerts or notifications for the next stage. Also used to search a database. So again, these are, again, think of it as a bill of material. This is the mechanism that, quite frankly, not only does the pull within the system, but leads to specific actions being required. So this pull, we can do it a couple different ways. We just talked about the forms. And really what it is, if you think of it this way, it's an if-then type of relationship. So in other words, if the criterion captured when it's in this form is acceptable, then you can push it to the next stage. The other way of doing it, and it really goes to the heart of our chemical management platform, and I mentioned earlier about the linking of SDS ingredients to the regulatory world, again, CAS number to regulation appropriately. You can use these, again, much like you use the forms in terms of a pull. So in other words, the tags, we call them, let's say specific regulation within, let's say, DHS. You can use this as an if-then. So in other words, if this regulation affects this chemical, then do you move it forward or not? Dashboards. We have ability to create, we'll call them widgets. Well, they are widgets, where you can visualize specific activities within an approval system. So visualization is a very intuitive way of providing immediate access to where you're at in terms of the requests. How long is the review occurring? The breakdown by stage or action. Possibly you might want to look at some data over time, like new requests or resolved requests. And as I think we all know, visualization of any process, it's intuitive to all levels of an organization. You don't need language and translation. It speaks for itself, I guess, as you would say. So the risk assessment, as Augusta mentioned, you can use these at any stage. There's two different types. There's the ILO, or International Labor Organization, for the health of the worker, and then there's the UN risk assessment for the transport and storage of the chemical. And what this really is doing is it's looking at the hazard rating of a substance and then calculating a risk effect to the worker. And but also a risk effect to the storage and transport of that material. So you can set these up at any stage, as Augusta showed, in the approval process, specific to what you're trying to accomplish. Obviously, one thing we think is a great idea is wherever there's workplace health and safety issues in your approval process, you really should consider doing a risk assessment. What's nice about our tool, it's COSH compliant. And actually, the rules that we build our risk assessment tool around, since we're an Australian company, come out of Australian legislation in the early 90s, which led to the COSH framework. So what I'm trying to show here is, again, the framework and the mechanics behind our approval process. One thing to note, we set this up with you. You basically, using Visio or something, document out how you want your process to work. We structure it. We show you what we did. We train you on how to do it yourself and maintain it. So risk assessment, I want to spend some time behind to show, what is behind the tool itself, since this is a very important piece of the approval process. That is the minimization, or at least the identification of the harm to the worker of this substance. So our tool works really in 4 stages, the severity. So it identifies just how hazardous this thing is, and then the probability of exposure based upon the scale of use, its potential of being airborne or volatility, and of course frequency of use. But also we look at what we call task-specific scenarios. I think we all know that spraying something is a lot different than picking it up off a pallet and putting it into a truck. The next stage is to calculate the risk, or the risk effect to the worker. And the 4th stage is to, let's say, validate this specific risk effect to the worker. You need controls in the environment or the facility itself. So what our tool does, it looks at all those H codes coming off the SDS and really puts them into 5 categories of hazards. Basically being extreme, high, medium, low, and minimal. And really what we're doing here is normalizing, we'll call it the hazards data itself, into categories. So instead of 200-300 of these, we're clumping them together to come up with basically an exposure matrix, we'll call it. That then basically points to an applied control banding, as you can see down there in the lower right corner, and then it actually is a representation of the International Labor Organization control banding for worker safety that I believe has been used now in over 1.5 billion work cells globally. Scale of use. We look at the quantity, its volatility in terms of both a liquid and also a solids, depending obviously on the material, the frequency of exposure, and certainly the amount. And the risk calculation is what we're doing here is taking that hazards data that we normalize, so to speak, and then using the scale of use to basically calculate a risk effect rating. And then what we're able to do is, let's say, once we come up, let's say, of a risk with a risk effect of a 3, let's say ventilation required, we also have in place a set of documents that can be used as controls. They can be industry standards, they can be your own. And what it's doing is it's basically it's identifying the fact that you can maintain this specific risk effect if you create in that worker environment the following set of controls. Again, we're using standards or your own internal standards to do that. So what you're really doing is defining the work cell. So for instance, if it says ventilation only, you may have to provide, excuse me, maybe you have to rotate workers in and out. You may have to do specific types of ventilation. The other stage is you look at the same substance with the same frequency of use, and then with our software, you're able to look at what we call the UN control approach for storage and transport. So what it says here is that, for instance, if something is a 4+ and you've, through your scale of use and your controls, define it as a risk effect of 3. With our software now, you're able to flip that same risk effect into the storage and transport of that material. So in other words, you can identify how it needs to be contained. Does it need to be separated from other materials? What's the separation of the wall? What's the type of the material you'll use to transport it, let's say in terms of piping? And so what you're really building here is around a risk assessment report, a set of controls, we'll call a sign-off document, that defines that workplace and the use of that material to minimize harm to the worker. And that's what we see here. In fact, we have spent probably 20 years as a company on this for the following. Make sure these risk assessment documents are 1 page and they're very concise, easy to understand, lots of color coding, minimalization of words. So what it's saying here is that because of this type of control, in this case, the user did not provide any environmental control. So in other words, what is happening here is that the environment that the worker is using this chemical in, there's no control available. So what it's saying is because this hazard is high, but because the way you're using it is extremely high, and you're going to have to provide containment. It also looks at the OELs of the material, required PPE, and in this case, the GHS placards, required placards. So we're very specific on how we structure this report because this is a communication tool in our mind. So what I wanted to do here, spend some time, and we'll talk again about the mechanics behind what Augusta was able to show you and how our approval process uses risk assessment in its stages to, quite frankly, minimize harm to the worker, and also to ensure that you're using materials in your environment, let's say with a focus on being non-hazardous, but if you must use hazardous materials, we're providing the controls you put in place. So, Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you, and Paul's going to talk about how we can specifically help, sort of the science behind our solution.
Well, thanks, Tom. Great job. I mean, really how we can help is just help you keep your employees safe. And at the same time, we want to make you look good personally and professionally. So we want to give you the tools so that you can better understand and control what's happening with your chemicals. You know, kind of not to jump into my presentation too quick, but I hope during Gusty's presentation you might have seen where she was able to get information very quickly at her fingertips, do a environmental report on the chemical. That's just the beauty of our system. And the keeping everything consistent is another beautiful thing. I mean, the risk assessments would all be the same. You can understand your data. Consistency is always good in data. So anyway, but just a little about Chemwatch. We've been in business over 25 years, actually almost 30 now. I should change my slide. We do have 21 offices. We're an international company. 6 of the top 20 Fortune 500 companies have our products. Markets oil and gas, automotive, mining, aerospace. And we are the world's largest provider of chemical management software. Kind of the three-legged stool, what makes us, unique, special, great is, we have excellent data. We have over 30 million vendor SDSs. We have our own regulatory database. We have a great team of people working, behind the scenes with your information. We have about 170 experts. And everything is hosted on the Amazon Web Services site. So it's scalable, software as a service. You log into it. There's very little IT requirements. You just basically get in the system and start benefiting from it. Easy to set up, easy to start using. Everything is plug and play. So when you saw Gusty's screen, that's the administrative view, but we could make it a lot simpler. So you can turn a lot of things off. If your needs grow, you say, well, I want to start off with just basic SDS management, then I want to grow into approvals and risk assessment. We can turn those modules on as needed. It could save you money or just save the complexity of trying to roll out a new system. Everything is .NET. So everything, as you saw, is, the information just flows from one module to another. And it also has a very robust API. If you have a existing system, you just want to feed data. You say, well, I have a system already. I just love to take the risk assessment information and push that in. Then we can just simply stand up the risk assessment module and then via our API just push that data into your existing system. So you don't have to take, start over with a new system. We may just complement or feed the system that you have already, and we do that all the time. And of course, we're cloud-based, SaaS model, minimal IT required. So we have about 30 million vendor SDSs in our system. Gusty mentioned our 350,000 gold SDSs, where we've actually re-authored an SDS, and we keep about 450 data points. We do support 47 languages and 93 country formats. So we do create all 16 sections of an SDS when we create, an SDS. So if you're an international company and you're moving chemicals from place to place, or you want to know what regulatory concerns do I have using this chemical at this location, we can tell you that, because in a gold document, you just simply do like 4 or 5 mouse clicks and boom, you see that SDS with that company's regulatory information. So it's a very powerful feature for multinational companies. And we have about 6,000 real-time links that we keep track of in our regulatory database. So the second point is we have a regulatory database that we have a team of about 20 people that do nothing but keep this current on your behalf. So California Prop 65, Department of Homeland Security, depending on the country, they have their own list that's important. We keep all that current for you. So when you're looking for information, a few mouse clicks away, you have it, and we already have your chemical information. We have the regulatory information. So having that in one database or in one place, we leverage those two databases against each other, and then you're the beneficiary of that because you know right away what you need to know about that chemical at that location. And we have over 250,000 classified substances. So if you need to know about a substance, you're authoring, you're mixing something, a lot of power in that as well. So, another thing is, the heart and soul of a lot of this is the SDS, and keeping up with your SDS is, it's kind of a pain in the rear. We do that for you. So we basically get your SDS, we register it, we acquire the data, we extract the data, and then we make that data available to you. But then in turn, we leverage that data so you can make labels, safety cards, mini SDSs. We didn't talk about those. People love our mini SDSs. We can feed that data into other systems. So there's a lot we can do, including generating a risk assessment. So there's a lot of power, but all that power hinges from the SDS, and we basically take over that for you. So we just take that issue right out of your hair, so you can focus on other important things to your business other than keeping track of all the SDSs. Like I mentioned, we support 47 languages, so our user interface can change to 47 different languages, and we support over 93 countries. So if you're working in multiple countries, you need to know about an approval. You need to do a risk assessment maybe for the UK because they require it. Our system will let you do that right away. So in addition to doing risk assessment, because it helps you better understand your chemicals in the US, if you have a location in the UK or Australia, New Zealand, somewhere like that, you can quickly do a risk assessment and be compliant. And perhaps that's already happening in your organization, and you're doing it now somehow. With Chemwatch, you could roll that right into your normal business processes. And then just in my last couple slides, we do have a mobile app. We try to talk about that. You can do everything just about. You can't author an SDS, so we do have a strong authoring tool in Chemwatch. You can't author an SDS on the mobile app, but you can do just about everything else. So in this example, we're actually doing a risk assessment from the mobile app. So we have the ability to geotag, do risk assessments from the floor, access your SDSs, look at reporting. And some people say, well, my users need a very simple system. And I always just suggest that, well, you could use our phone app. So here's just some screenshots I put together. It's not the most beautiful slide ever, but basically I clicked on the third one down with my finger, chemical store, the fourth one, excuse me. Then it shows me that directory. And then I clicked on the benzothermium chloride, a word I can't say. I clicked that, and then it presented me the SDS. And I can zoom into that, I can share that, I can send it via text message, I can email it. So I can work the system from my phone, but there's very good access to data just from your phone. And then we do also have an offline archive that's very powerful. People really like that. It's, it is a, point in time snapshot of your SDSs, but it can be put into most any device. You can put it on a thumb drive. It's very easy to use. It uses a web browser as a user interface. It's super simple. So anyway, So that being said, I'd like to roll into the question and answer phase. Please use your question and answer button on the screen on the GoToWebinar session, and go ahead and submit your questions. And we've got a couple here already. And what I'd like to do is go ahead and just read the first few and open it up for Tom and Gusty. And one of the first questions I had is, how difficult is it to create a task in a risk assessment? Gusty, I know we chatted about that briefly. Would you want to handle that one real quick?
So the tasks are already predefined within our system. However, there is a user-defined option for the tasks that display in risk assessment. So it will come delivered with about 16 tasks, but you can also add user-defined tasks, and it's very easy to do. As an administrator, you just go in there and you go to the task button, you go down to the user-defined button, and then you would click on that, and then you would define the new task, and then it would be available for all users that are using risk assessment. So
Great.
Quite easy.
A similar question to that is, can you make multiple tasks into like a work order or a job? Is there a way to do that in risk assessment?
You can associate multiple materials that have multiple tasks assigned to them to a single job. If I understood the question correctly. So yes, you can do that. That is achievable within the system.
Yeah, I think that was a thrust of it, and I've got 3 or 4 more have popped up. If anybody would like to, jump off, we'll of course send you all these questions via, reply email. So if you have a commitment, we appreciate your staying with us, and it's just about the top of the hour. So we'll keep answering questions, and but we do appreciate your attendance. And hope you'll stay with us for a few more minutes, but we are kind of at the witching hour, so to speak. So here's another question, Gusty. Does the risk assessment have to be performed by the requester, or is it possible for another stakeholder in the process to perform the risk assessment in approvals?
Yes, so our system is highly configurable. That was just an example of the manager performing the risk assessment. However, any user or any stakeholder who's assigned to that stage could have the risk assessment assigned as the action step within their stage. So yes, it can go anywhere within your workflow that you would like, and you can assign any individual to perform that risk assessment.
Okay, great. Here's another one. Do all the users, the approvers, stakeholders, need to have a software license? That's a great question. And the answer is the way we do our licensing module is we do floating software, so concurrent users. So we don't differentiate between somebody that's a very occasional user versus somebody that's a power user. They are just a user. So if you have 10 concurrent licenses, any 10 users can use the system. So if you have a manager that's very occasional, we don't force you to buy a dedicated approver license for that. So our software licensing model is very cost effective, and I think that's kind of the nature of this question is, could it get expensive if we had to buy a license for everybody in the ecosystem or the stakeholders? And the answer is no. We basically are very, very good on how we do that. So so anyway, I guess I called my own number on that one. Let's go to this next question. Can you track chemical inventory volumes based on the chemicals stored by location?
Yes, so you can track that within the approvals module, and the approvals module is going to track that at the material or the product level. However, within the home module, you do have the ability to track not only the current volume or weight, you can also track the maximum volume weight or licensed volume or weight as well. And then we also have an additional module in our system that allows you to track that on a container level. Now, the SISOP portion of our system, which is the barcode container tracking system, is not fully incorporated into our approvals module, but that is planned for, in the timeline of the next few years of development.
Great.
I have 2.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
How about time for 2 more?
Yep.
Yep. Are the chemical approval questions in the system configurable?
Yes. All of the questions within the form are configurable by the user. So we have something within the master system settings that I didn't have time to show that is called Form Builder, and essentially that allows you to build your forms. You can define those questions however you would like, and there are a multitude of form fields that you can use. Those include, as Tom mentioned during the PowerPoint, check boxes, checkbox lists, radio buttons, drop-down lists, free text fields, multi-line text fields, and many more.
Great, thanks, Gusty. Last one. Can I attach my own documents as an action step?
Yeah. Yes. So essentially within Form Builder, you have an uploads option. So that is one that I just neglected to mention. But yes, you can attach your own documents as an action step within a form, and that can be passed along to other approvers or reviewers upstream, and it can just be viewed directly through the Documents button. So if you re-review the video that we showed, there's a little Document button up in the upper right-hand corner, and that will allow you to view any of those uploaded documents. But yes, the answer is yes.
I think that's it for questions. So, Paul, you want me to finish it up? Well, I'll finish it up. Join us for our next webinar, folks, in June. This is a very important one. Those who are affected by the NFPA change to the International Fire Code will want to see this. We're the only vendor right now that has a module that will allow you to be compliant and reporting on the chemical platform. So this is a good one. Hope you can make it. We'll be sending out notices, pass to your friends, same time. It's on June 19th.
Hey, Tom, may I interject? I hate to interject at the last moment, but we did miss one question, and the question is we have copies of SDSs in our labs. We like the mini SDS, and it would work well for this. Do you set up a form to make a mini SDS a vendor SDS? We want all the minis for each material. So I think the basis of this question is essentially, instead of wanting a mini SDS at the material level, which would be, benzene or, acetone, you would want to have that at the product level, which would be, acetone from Fisher or Sigma Aldrich or any of those other manufacturers. And in that case, yes, we can create mini SDSs based on manufacturer or vendor information. And essentially what we do is we take those vendor extracted data points off of that vendor SDS and we feed them into the mini SDS template. So I believe that was your question. If you need more clarification, please reach out to us.
Thank you, Gusty. And if you do have any other questions, certainly feel free to reach out to us. You have our emails. And I'm going to conclude it now. Thanks again for your participation. We'll be sending out the recording and the PowerPoint within the next 24 hours. And the Q&A hopefully by Friday, for sure Monday. So again, many thanks for joining us, and everyone have a good day.